So today we're going to be rebuilding this Autolite 4100 off of a 66 Galaxy with a 428 and a 4-speed. So pretty valuable, but it's sat since the 80s. So this carburetor was all rusted up and sealed up. And if you follow my videos, I kind of went ahead and went through some home remedies to carb cleaning. And we got the carb pretty clean now, so we're going to go ahead and reassemble it, and we're going to move on through. So whenever assembling a carburetor, especially one you're not extremely familiar with, I always recommend laying out all your parts and pieces and determining where they go beforehand so you don't have any mishaps. So that's what we've done here. And anyway, we're going to get working through this carburetor and get it all done, and we'll set it on a test engine and see how she goes. But let's get cracking. Okay, so before we get started here, I want to make a note about the throttle shafts. Now, the secondaries on this carburetor were seized shut and the primaries were real gummed up. So I went ahead and I had already removed these and then cleaned them up and put them back in. And you want to check your throttle shaft wear. And this one didn't have enough throttle shaft wear to warrant a bushing kit, but you want to be mindful of that. You don't want to have much up and down or side to side play. When you open them, they are going to have some in play. That's normal, but you don't want that shaft plays, and you'll have big vacuum leak situations. But in this case, we were good. I just to get them out, they're real simple. The primary shaft, this nut on the end comes off. This assembly just pops right off, and you unscrew these screws and pull the butterflies out. And you want to pull those with your finger, or if you pull them with, say, a pair of needle nose pliers, you want to have a towel around them so you don't gall them all up when you're pulling them out. If you do that, you want to go in with a file and sand off all the high edges. But anyway, real simple. They all come out. And when you reassemble them, they do have a side bias. There's these little dimples. Now those little dimples should face the bottom side of the carburetor. They should indent. The indent should be on the bottom side of the carburetor, and that's with both throttle shafts. So anyway, we're gonna go ahead now that we had that all assembled and that checked out good. Now most people won't even have to mess with that. So you know, in most cases, yours will be fine. But we're going to go ahead and move to the choke assembly now and keep on rolling. Alright, so onto your choke assembly now. You have your standard choke assembly here, and then you're also going to have your 3 longer screws and 3 smaller screws, and they won't have a locking washer on them because for this retainer, you'll also have your adjustment cap and your adjustment cap gasket, along with a little E-clip here, and then your smaller gasket for your passage here. Now what I like to do on these smaller gaskets is put a little grease on them, so then when you, just a very light amount, so when you go to install them, they don't get pushed off to the side or pinched. So as you can see here, you know, just a little bit of grease really holds that on. So we're going to go ahead and rotate this lever so it is opposite of our piston inside our choke here, so that our lever on our carburetor here will hook in properly. So we're simply just going to hook that in. Okay, so as you see here, we have our choke on. We got our 3 screws in, our gasket in, and our lever is properly hooked in here to our choke. And this is kind of the choke kickdown linkage. So just a good test. Here is it should be on full choke when the lever is set in this position. So as you see here, it's got the throttle blades a little more open, and Here's your fast idle screw, so that's your adjustment. So from there we're going to go ahead and move on. The rest of the choke's pretty simple. If you're running the factory choke, you just put your gasket on. Your little piece right here on your spring would go into this divide here on this lever, and then you would adjust it back and forth accordingly for whatever choke rate you'd want. Okay, so the next thing we're going to go ahead and do is we need to get our secondary diaphragm in here. Now it's held in place by a push pin that's pressed. It gets tighter as it goes in, so you have to pound it out from the top, and then we're going to set our diaphragm in here, and then we'll knock it back in. But I'm going to go ahead and we're going to reuse this diaphragm for now. It didn't have any rips or tears, so I put some grease on it, and it's still fairly pliable. But if it does not work, they are about $30 for this whole assembly. So, and kind of once these clips are on the top here, it's pretty hard to get them off this plastic piece. So anyway, we're going to go ahead, and it's pretty easy to get to, so we're going to go ahead and try it, and if it doesn't work, then we'll put a new one in. But for now, so it's fairly simple how it goes in. Obviously you have your hole here for your check ball deal and your vacuum at the top, but we're just going to put it in. We're going to line it up with the plastic hole, and now I'm going to go ahead and we're going to set this on the top. We're going to not set it on this part of the carburetor here, and we're going to go ahead and pound this this roll pin in here. Okay, so once you have your diaphragm installed and your pin pounded back in, and it doesn't have to go too far, I just went till it's flush with the body. It's not going to fall out from that point. One thing to keep in mind when you're pounding this in is obviously you don't want to pound it into this plastic piece, because you'll never get it pounded back out without destroying this, since you got to knock it through from the other way. So you want to make sure you have this good and lined up before you go ahead and drive that pin through. So completing this assembly here, you got a few more pieces. So obviously we have our diaphragm cap, our secondary spring, which there are different springs, our lever here with our clip that attaches it to our throttle here, our secondary butterflies, and then our 4 longer screws that are specifically for this item, this cap here, and then our little secondary check ball. When you're taking it apart, you want to be real careful not to lose that. So anyway, we'll go ahead and get moving. But this little check ball here, it goes inside this hole up here at the top, where there's a hole for this diaphragm. So you want to put it in there and keep your carburetor upright during assembly, and make sure that you don't lose that piece. Another thing I want to mention, that when you're putting your secondary diaphragm together here, you want to make sure that you have this spring slipped over this little nub on your cover, and you do that by putting the spring on the cover. And obviously I use a screwdriver, the flat head end of it, and I just push that coil spring over the nub, and then from there it's on good and tight, and it's not going anywhere. Alright, at this point I'm going to go ahead and install the power valve. So this is our power valve here, and you can check it by sucking on this end and making sure you know, it's not punctured and it creates good suction. So when you suck in on the end, you should feel, you know, you can hold your finger on it and that end will go in. So this is a good power valve. We're going to go ahead and take our power valve gasket here, and just simply we're going to thread it into the slot. I'm going to go ahead and use this overly large crescent wrench to tighten this, just because that's what I had sitting around the workbench. So you're just going to take it nice and easy, And what I did before I ran this on here is I put a little grease on my gasket so that when I tighten this up, it's not going to destroy my gasket. So I'm going to go ahead and finish tightening this up and we'll move on. Now another point to make here when tightening your power valve down is it doesn't have to come fully compressed with the body. You want it tight, but you don't want to, really, gorilla arm it here, because you're going to go ahead and pull those little small threads out of this crappy aluminum. So just get it where it's good and snug and it's not going to back itself out, and you should be good from there. Now tightening our screws down here, you want to keep in mind that each set of screws has a different job. So you want to make sure that you have the right screws in the right place. And when you're tightening them down, if they're getting snug and they're not all the way down, chances are you got the wrong screw. So you want to be using the right screw for the proper application. And you want to remember when you're tightening these screws up, as always, you want everything to be snug, but don't go as hard as you can. If you pull threads out, you'll really regret it. So in this case, less is always more. So if it leaks, you can always tighten it up more. Whereas, if you tighten it too far and pull your threads out, you're done. Alright, so at this time we're going to go ahead and install our accelerator pump assembly. So you obviously have your accelerator pump diaphragm, your accelerator pump arm and body, your accelerator pump spring. Ford uses this little piece in their accelerator pump system, then our 4 screws. Now in this case, this came with the kit, but we're not going to use this rod because we have kind of an abnormal design with our accelerator pump lever. So the first thing we're going to do is put this little rubber piece in, and you want to look in your carb body here. There should be a larger hole in the center that this piece is going to go through, and you're just going to grab it from behind and give it a little tug and pull it through. And when you put this in, you want to make sure that nipple is showing on the other side. So, and again, if there's multiple holes, you want to make sure that it's in the centermost hole. So from there, we're going to set our spring on, and the larger diameter part of the spring is going to set in the cup. Now we have our diaphragm here. Now this piece is where our arm pushes against, so it's going to go face up. We'll go ahead and usually this lever's off here, but in this case it's still on. Now considering this is a stock engine, I'm going to put it in this position closest to the body because it's going to give us less shot from the accelerator pump. Should make good engine vacuum, so we shouldn't need to help it much. So we'll go ahead and go with that setting. So anyway, we're going to put our diaphragm on here. Flip our body around. Get all our holes lined up and run these screws in. Again, when you're doing this, you want to make sure that you always have the right screws for the application. They're all longer and shorter than each other. So again, you want to pay close attention. If they bottom out, you don't want to force them because you'll just you'll be destroying stuff. So obviously you're going to put them in and tighten them in a cross pattern, and you should be good to go on that assembly. Alright, so moving on to our accelerator pump and booster assemblies here. What's included here is obviously your booster and accelerator pump, and with one of them being your primary and one of them being your secondary, it being very easy to tell because your primary here has some porting for your accelerator pump while your secondary booster assembly does not. So we obviously have our booster gaskets, and then our flow screw, our hollow flow screw here with our flow weight, and then our accelerator pump ball there, and then this air dispersion plate, and then obviously our 2 gaskets for our screw, and I guess a third gasket for your secondary screw. One thing you want to be mindful of is when you do these assemblies, you want to make sure you put all your accelerator pump pieces in your primary side. Now your primary side is the side with your accelerator pump diaphragm here, so it's real simple. So we're going to go ahead and we'll go through the primary side, as the secondary is pretty self-explanatory. So we're just going to simply drop our check ball in. Now if you do have leaking problems, it's supposed to seal on this check ball, so you can take a little punch, and I've already done this, but you put the punch down and top that ball and very, very, very lightly tap that ball. You don't want to put any divots in that ball or get it wedged in this body, because then it's ruined. So you only want to do this if it leaks, and I used a brass punch myself in particular so that I wouldn't damage the ball. So again, don't mess with it unless you have to. So I just did because I had the proper tools. So anyway, we threw the ball in. We're going to throw our, we're going to slide our weight here inside of our screw. We're going to take our booster assembly here and drop our gasket down and over. Now there's a little lip, so you want to make sure you get it good down and over that lip so you don't distort your gasket. So we're going to go ahead and then set our primary. Again, you want the squirters on this booster assembly, our primary assembly on there, and then our dispersion plate. Now they gave me 2 gaskets, so I'm going to go ahead and use them, as I don't trust the sealing around this plate. So it's going to simply go, we're going to put it on our screw here first, so it's going to go gasket, and then our plate here, and then gasket. And we're going to, without losing, remember we have that rod in there, and then we're just going to drop that whole assembly on in there. And then from there, you're just going to simply, you got your gasket here on the bottom of your secondary nozzles. So we'll just drop that on in there, and then drop our dummy screw in that's just holds the boosters on, and we'll tighten that down, and that pretty much concludes your booster assembly. Alright, so at this point it's becoming to look like actually a carburetor and not just a body and a bunch of miscellaneous parts. So we're going to go through the float and jet assembly now, and some of our new parts and pieces here. This is a 1-piece needle and seat that came with my kit, which is much better as opposed to the old factory 2-piece where this top clip could fall off, and then you just flood your engine out and you could burn your car down. So these 1-pieces are a nice add-on. Also, some pieces I like to use is, now this is a plastic float. Now I prefer these plastic floats over these brass floats because they resist higher fuel pressures a lot better, and do a lot better in varying fuel pressures, where the brass float, though much more durable, it's heavier, so it doesn't resist as much pressures. It doesn't have as much counterbalance. So that's something to factor in when you're going about your carburetor rebuild. So something else I want to mention in comparison from a 4-barrel to a 2-barrel, and why a 4-barrel is actually a more efficient carburetor, contrary to popular belief, than a 2-barrel. So as you see here, these are our primary jets off of our 4100 here, and they're a number 49 jet. Now, unless you get into the secondaries, you're cruising off of these jets and you're getting good manifold vacuum and good signal through your smaller boosters here, so you're going to get a lot better gas mileage with that, as opposed to this is your standard small block 2-barrel, and if I can read our jet size here, it looks like 56. So 49 versus 56, that's quite a difference when you're cruising down the road. A 2-barrel, and you can just see the difference in orifice sizes there. It's a lot larger. With a 2-barrel, you're cruising down the road, and those two barrels have to account for all the way from idle to, you know, your red line. Whereas a 4-barrel carburetor, you can cruise around on your smaller primary system, and then when you need it, you can get into your secondary. So all around, a 4-barrel carburetor is always the way to go, and these 4100s were just what you needed back in the 60s. So moving on through, we have some little parts and pieces, and we're gonna get our float and jet assembly put in here. So you have these little brass pieces, hopefully you still do, and they're pretty simple. They just simply slide in here, and you know, they just equalize some of your fuel. Now the next item I'd like to put in is our jets. Now you don't ever want to be pushing on your carburetor, pushing on your throttle linkage, so for our roller engine we're building, we'll just go ahead and use our box here, and that creates a good support on the carb base where we're not pushing on the throttle linkage. So now we can go ahead and install our jets. Now you should have 4 jets if you have a 4100, and your smaller jets are going to go on your primary side, and your larger jets are going to go on your secondary side, and they should be numbered. And if not, you should be able to visually tell a difference between the orifice sizes. So in my right hand here, I'm holding a primary, and then in my left hand, I'm holding a secondary. So you can see that the orifice sizing is quite a bit larger if you can't tell. So anyway, again, your primary is your side on your accelerator pump. So we're going to go ahead and put those in. And I like to use, you know, there's special jet screwdrivers, but I specially ground this screwdriver so it fits the contours of a jet just perfect, and it's not going to slip out and gall our jet up. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to get these turned into the body of our 4100. And again, you know, they don't need to be gorilla tight. You don't want to pull threads out, and you don't want to crack your carb body, you know, just good and snug where they're not going to vibrate loose. So we'll go ahead and get those installed. Alright, so there we have our jets in. Now we're going to go ahead and install our one-piece needle and seat assembly, and there's a little gasket. Comes with your kit that goes on there. And again, you want to be careful with those gaskets so you don't get them pinched. And it's a little bit more tricky to get in, but you want to get it started with your fingers, and then go ahead and use a ratchet to take them the rest of the way. So in this case, this is a 3/8, and it's a 12 point, so it can fit in between, you know, in between the body there. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and install our float assemblies. As you see here, you have these rods with these clips, and they're biased by side so that you make sure that your little tang in the back here is lined up with your needle. So they're pretty simple, as you see here. You know, they just slide in. Now this tang needs to clip over the back. There's a little notch on that seat assembly, just like this one here. So I'm going to have to take our screwdriver here and just work it back and over that seat. You want to be real careful not to damage anything, so just be patient and eventually it'll snap on over. Just like so. So that makes it so your float isn't going to come flying out and your float rod isn't going to be moving all over. So as far as that goes, it's pretty simple. You just want to be patient and don't try and ram jam it, and you won't damage anything. Real nice and easy, just like that, and at that point your floats are good and installed. Okay, so once you have your floats in, you're going to want to go ahead and set your float height. So every rebuild kit comes with a specification and a little piece of measuring tape here, or a measuring stick, to set your float height by. And how you do this is you measure from the top of the body with the gasket off down to the float surface. Now, there's a few caveats with this and some problems I personally have with this. Different floats have different distances from, the top of the float to, that pivoting rod. So these measurements really aren't going to be too accurate with these different floats. But what I've noticed across all the floats when I've done these carburetors, they all come out to just about level with the body, if not a little, sloped down. So, level, or they're tilted ever so slightly. So what I went ahead and did is, on this carburetor, I set them level. And we'll see how that runs, which is pretty close to my specification. It's always different. Every carburetor has a different specification. But when you get done, they always seem like they're darn near level, if not a little, just a tad tilted down. So we'll go ahead and, like I said, start with this. So at this point, we're getting on to the end of our carburetor build. So we're going to take our carburetor top gasket here and lay it on. In a lot of cases when I've got these, they're a little bent up, so I tried to lay a bunch of books on top of this for about a day, and it straightened it out good enough where I don't think we're going to have any problems. But that's something to keep in mind. It makes it a lot easier. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and slide this rod into our choke assembly and dropping the base of our carburetor down and lining up our holes. Go ahead and take our 8 screws and we'll get this top tightened down. So as always, you want to get all of the screws at least somewhat started before you go ahead and fully tighten any of them down. So we've successfully done that here, and everything seems to be going together very well. Alright, and finally we want to get our little clip here on our choke assembly so our rod doesn't fall out. And the only thing we have left here is this little piece that is part of the intricate Autolite idle circuit, excuse me. So we just simply have our gasket and our 2 screws, and we'll get that ran in. It's located here right on the back side of the choke horn. Alright, so our final little bit of our carb rebuild here is our idle mix screws. Now I've already installed these, but before I installed them, I took some steel wool and rubbed any of the corrosion off, and I put a very light coat of grease on them and turned them back in here. Now, when you're setting your mix screws, you want those to be at equal adjustment. Now, on some of these springs get in the way and kind of cause some issues, and all the porting's the same, and these mix screws are the same size. So I went ahead and I used my, my float measurement tool here, and I went ahead and measured them out so they were exactly the same length turned out and the exact same rotation. So from that point we'll have a good baseline. So what I assume I set them to when I turned them out is 2.5 turns. So that'll give us a good starting point when we go to run our engine. So I got this little brass fitting for our 3/8 line, and it's a flange fitting, so it doesn't need any seal or anything. So we'll tighten this down and take our 4100 here and go give it a shot on our 289 engine. Well, the first things first with getting this 4100 tested out is I need to fire up the old F100. All right, so we got our Autolite 4100 on here, and I turned the engine over for about 20 seconds, so it should be good and primed up. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I don't see any leaks. Running no choke here as the engine was warm from our previous run, so we're going to kick it over and see how she does. Give her some throttle here. You can tell she's cold. She's holding an idle. I got the idle mix screw set pretty high here, so pretty forgiving setting at the moment. Can't argue with that. Truth will come out here when it's under a load, what she does. Here we go. All right, that's pretty much it. 4100 carburetor runs real good. So I think it's ready to go back on old Chad's 66 Galaxy. Should be good to go. So that's a wrap.